my adventures. I've been poisoned, abducted, raped, shot. To survive, I agreed to be a military spy, and I got caught.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and I'm excited to bring you today's guest. This is in some level it's a bit of a different guest to some of my others, and in other senses not at all. But the reason I say different is because I have on the show today Mr. John Moulang. Now, John is someone that I consider to be an elder, even though, as you'll hear in this episode, he may not use that term himself. As he also points out to me, the use of the term legend, it's not something that is self-appointed. Potentially it's something that you may become or grow into or be called upon to be, such as master as well. And there's a quote that I absolutely love from another elder, Francis Weller, and I use his work a lot in my own work. And that quote is this: "Eldership comes when the youth come for something." And so that is something that I have come to John for with this conversation. He is someone that I met a couple of years ago. We were running an event. I've spoken about that event briefly, Manifest, in Sydney in 2019. And we had one panel that was entitled Young Bucks and Old Bulls. And the idea was to bring young men who are coming into work and into society and community and have them sit across and with some quote-unquote old bulls, some elders, some men of wisdom who are both in community leading and actually in the realm of men's work and working with men. And John was one of those men. I was incredibly fortunate to spend a little bit of time with him throughout that, and I would love to have spent some more time with him during that period, but I was very wrapped up in the creating and hosting and running of the event. But what I did experience in that short time with him was some amazing presence and insights into the wisdom and perspective of this man. And it was something that I knew I had to get him on the show because of the wisdom, the guidance, and the insight that he has for us humans, and certainly as young men coming through. And really, we touch on the idea of eldership in this podcast episode. There is so much when it comes to eldership, essentially around being guided into manhood, into community, and then becoming the elders of the next generation is predicated on being brought through by the elders before us. And there's a big gaping hole in society for elders right now, which is a challenge, and it's something that I think comes back to that quote: eldership comes when the youth come for something. And so I see that it falls upon us, quote unquote, the youth, to go to the elders, to be guided, to have wisdom and humanity bestowed upon us and poked and prodded and sat with. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have John on this podcast. You'll also hear John is clearly a man of a lot of depth and a lot of life experience. Holy shit. He says, look, someone's full story doesn't just get shared. You have to earn that right. And there's a lot of things that he alludes to in this conversation. Man, being caught, held captive in, rural Africa and all sorts of things. Being in a coma and, stepping to the precipice of death, and oh my goodness. But we also speak about things such as the shadow and what the shadow is and how it's impacting our lives and how it's preventing us from living with, fulfillment and depth. And so you can explore all of that in this wonderful podcast with John. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you his introduction here, his bio, and then I'll let you dive into the show. John has explored and experienced much of South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Thailand. He had intentions to build a career in surfing until a skateboard accident switched his focus to music. Firstly as a percussionist, then adding guitar and vocals as he developed his craft into a career. The years have also been given to architecture, project management, counselling and meditation training. In more recent years, John has offered consultancy to accessibility for people with disability, while also contributing to men's work, co-creating the annual Sydney National Men's Gathering. Now, as president of the National Men's Gathering Association, he continues expanding its offerings to regional areas and being more inclusive. John launched his first book of poetry, The Heart of One, in 2020, with the second coming out in September 2021 titled Dream, Wake, Listen, See. John is currently restructuring and consolidating into TrimTab 24/7 with 3 parts, being TrimTab Access, TrimTab Creative, and TrimTab Leadership, which supports those who are already leaders, wanting to be better leaders, evolving into great leaders with infinite impeccability. There is so much in this conversation and to be gained from elders such as John, and so I'm very excited to bring you this episode. So let's get on with the show. John Moulang, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. It is a privilege to have you here.
Thanks, man. It's mysterious and privilegey to be here.
Yes, thank you for that. Now, look, in terms of privilege, I think I did have the privilege of spending a little bit of time with you. What are we coming up a couple of years ago now? We ran an event in Sydney, and you were wonderful in giving your time. And we spoke off air about gratitude. I was incredibly grateful for that, the time that you gave to us, and also that I got to spend with you in short amounts, conversations. I think being witness to your wisdom, perhaps, and your grace, the embodiment of your lived experience. And I appreciate it at the time, but also I feel I wish I had been perhaps a bit more present to maybe some of the opportunities there. I am very aware, and I was at the time, that I was in very narrow task doing mode of kind of getting this event just right kind of thing, was almost all consuming, and in doing so potentially missing out on what could have perhaps supported me in creating a more powerful event. But it nothing else, it certainly warmed me to you, and I am very grateful to have you here today to have a conversation with me and share with my audience. So where I'd like to start with that is learning a little bit more about you. So I'm going to ask you this question, John, and you can take it wherever you would like. And that is, can you tell us a little of the story of who is John Moulang?
Well, Mike, I distinctly remember the look on your face when I said behind the scenes while the manifest was happening. Everyone starts by telling their story. And I said, there's no way I'm going to tell my story. It's too big and too long. And secondly, I think people need to earn the right to hear the depth of story. There's not many people who even understand or are able to hear that in my adventures I've been poisoned, abducted, raped, shot, and that's to survive, I agreed to be a military spy, and I got caught, and I double-crossed, and my life was very much in danger. And all that stuff, on reflection, there are a lot of things that I've experienced that I wouldn't want to do again. I wouldn't want to recommend. But so absolutely profound. Part of the poisoning, I was in a coma for 10 days and actually died. So,
wow.
I've had a glimpse of what that looks and feels like, and came out of the coma with absolutely no memory, didn't even know my name.
Right, in terms of your long-term memory?
Any memory.
Yeah, right.
I remember waking up in what was actually a medical college in India. And
How old were you at the time?
25.
Right.
I had gone to that part of the world in search of adventure. But basically, at that time, people would say, what are you looking for? Why do you do these things? What are you looking for? And I'd say myself, I think. And they go, what? But yeah, I mean, it's still a constant feeding of my addiction. I was born with an addiction called curiosity. And it was very interesting. I wasn't intending to talk much about this, but when I stood at the threshold of go or stay, when my heart was stopped, I had always imagined that heaven would be a place where all my questions would be answered. But when I stood there, there was nothing to ask. So it's very interesting, It was just like what, like irrelevant to ask questions, just to to be. So so I'll tell you a bit about myself. I work as a full-time professional.
Yes.
I'm on the board of the Association for Access Consultants in Australia. It's basically ensuring that the built environment is accessible for people with disability.
Right.
It's a wonderful job with that third factor of it's interesting, it's challenging, it's very well paid, and it's got the third factor of it's serving. And so next week I'm in court as an expert witness, and I assess and write reports, things like that. My main focus, outside of that, my deeper work is what we commonly call men's work. I'm the president of the National Men's Gathering Association, and co-creator of the Sydney National Men's Gathering, which happens on the June long weekend. So we've actually just had one, and it was fabulous. We just squeaked in COVID-wise, and yeah, so a lot of stuff around that. I'm an exponent of what's called accelerated learning, and apply that. I love it. It's just so scientific, even though I don't see myself as a teacher.
Right.
I see myself as a converser of provocation.
Right. Beautiful. Why the distinction?
Well, it's a distinction that comes from I suppose what I call beyond humanness. I think if I imagine myself as a teacher, then I have this thing that comes in to me called better than-ness. I think the world suffers from better than-ness. I remember also talking to you at Manifest about there's a whole heap of offerings out there that are immature, rip-offs, blah 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 blah. And there was a time when that concept it doesn't anymore, because everyone is where they're supposed to be. And I have this concept of destiny fiddling.
Right.
a lot about teaching is making a judgment of someone and something that I think they need. So I'm compelled to give it to them. I'm not driven by that.
Right.
I basically have a philosophy of I don't push myself in any way,
Mm-hmm.
but when I'm invited, I have to go.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have, when someone asks me for something, if I have it, I've got a responsibility to give it to them, but I have no responsibility what they do with it.
Yes, I love that, and that actually reminds me of a situation and a moment at our event. I had just spoken on stage, and there had been a lot going on for me essentially. But then I spoke, and we connected at some point afterwards in the break, and I was very grateful for your feedback and also your take on something that had happened towards the end of my talk, where it seemed that one guy was quite keen to bring his, perhaps what seemed to me, his desire for the experience of my talk into it, and you responded to me with something like, maybe, almost speaking to this guy, maybe buddy, you're just going to sit down and feel your discomfort, and I loved that, and I appreciated the loving invitation perhaps that was in that, and maybe it's helped soothe my interpretation of it. But then there was a moment where we were chatting then, and then my mind started wandering to logistics of the event and things that were coming up. And I suppose I kind of changed hats, in part there mid-conversation, and thinking some admin or something in my head. And then eventually when I said, I ended the conversation, I said I needed to move on. You mentioned this, and you kind of gave that to me. I think you said, I saw you leave about a minute ago or something to that effect. And, there was absolutely no malice, no judgment in that. It was all grace. It was like you were giving me something that was mine, even that I didn't see it perhaps in that moment. And, I appreciate that far more with hindsight, of course. The medicine, I think, in that, you gave it to me, but it's up to me what I do with that. And, I can take a lot from that. One of those things being present. So I'd love to explore that. I mean, there might not be another question out of that, but I'd love to explore the idea of, I suppose, developing that sight, and perhaps the grace of, giving that, and not a teaching where here's something you need, but simply here's something that I saw, this is yours, and I'll give it to you. Can you talk us through that a little?
I once contributed to a Russian lady who some friends met in Russia, and I contributed financially and actively to bring her to Australia to do a connected breathing, commonly called rebirthing, thing to put into her portfolio to take back to Russia to be a rebirther.
Right.
Which, for those that don't know, is a deep active meditation that brings things from the hiding in the subconscious into the conscious, and able to process them generally as an adult when they were put there as a child.
Right.
And in exchange, she taught me a few things, and one of them was a scientific technique to see aura.
Right.
So that was very effective, very interesting. So so usually when I say that to people, they say, "Oh, can you see what do you see?" And I say, I'm not seeing anything because I'm not looking in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I give the example of walking down the street and seeing someone moving behind a slightly open curtain,
right,
and getting the glimpse and wondering what there was. So I climb over the picket fence and go and look into the window through the crack to see what's going on inside. I see that as quite inappropriate. So I don't have any need or desire to walk around, you know, looking at auras. But sometimes someone will just show up and there's an aspect that their curtains are just wide open. And
it's hard not to see it if you're walking past when the curtains are wide open.
Yeah, especially when they're standing there naked waving. So I guess you know, it comes from a whole lot of bits. And you know, attention and exploration and work. For instance, once when we had a health and well-being centre, I answered the phone and a lady said, so-and-so has recommended I come and see you. I was counselling at the time in training. And she said, can you tell me a bit about your work? And I said, I think the best way that I can do that is tell you a bit about yourself. And I said, you are not heavy, you're lightweight, you struggle with punctuality, you eat small meals, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And she said, I had no idea Helen told you about me. I said, Helen's never discussed you. What I can tell all that from is the way you speak, the pitch of your voice, the speed of your diction, and that is not hairy fairy huru guru. It's learned technique. It's about having studied very fundamentally and basically Ayurveda, and the doshas. You know, Deepak Chopra was always huge on that, introducing that to the world. So you know, it's like a learned technique, and then having you know a sprinkling of arrogance to take the chance and you know have a go at, you know, seeing how it works.
Did it satisfy her in that moment?
Oh yes, indeed. She booked in. To answer your question of how does one develop that insight, it's a whole bunch of things, and definitely relationship with shadow.
Can you explain that for us a little bit?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll go back, and if I might need a reminder to come back to this point, but essentially, after we conceived, our conditioning begins. You know, in the womb, we are being conditioned. We're hearing music. We are hearing conversations. We're hearing tone. We're hearing people arguing. We at our parents and others lovemaking, and we're born, and it just keeps building, you know, and mostly out of love we are conditioned, because our parents, our family, our friends want us to be successful enough that we survive. Yeah. And so, you know, it's important to know which fork to use with the fish, and you know how to be and what to say and what not to say. And a big part of that is shadow denial. Now, everything in the universe has wherever there's light, there's a shadow. And my perspective is, if I walk into a pitch dark room and turn on the light, the darkness hasn't gone. I just can't see it. You know, that's a distinction. So yeah. So it's been quite a challenging and costly exercise to acknowledge shadow,
Yes. For yourself, or
Yes,
yeah.
yes, for me to acknowledge mine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all those sub-personalities that exist for good reason: liar, critic, manipulator, killer. You know, they're all in there because life is such for the human animal. We need all those qualities,
Mm.
but the big conditioning suppresses them. You know, it would be ridiculous to go for a job interview and the guy says, "Well, that's great. We really love it. You know, yes. You know, can you start Monday?" And I go, "Yeah, that's great. It's great. That's great. Now, don't you fuck with me. I'll fucking kill you." It wouldn't be appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be a worry if you do get the job after that.
Yeah, but it's different from me hiding it from myself.
Yes. So the those aspects of ourselves, they have a basic function to not be present and therefore in the light, but be in the shadows in certain situations.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make that sense when it's with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, having been up in the Khyber Pass with bandits and being totally at their mercy and having to escape because they had been paid to dispose of me.
Right.
You know, it's not a time to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
that was an accessing of parts of your shadow that essentially stay in the shadows in most other aspects of your life. The kill or be killed, like survival mechanism, whatever that stuff is, now it gets to come out for my survival.
First of all, I have to acknowledge that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went in and met them.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to know them. And then I got to befriend them. And then I got to love them. Now, you know, to me, the shadow denial is, you know, people say, I don't have those parts.
Mm.
My son could never have done that.
Yes.
And the key to this is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my impression is that when the Beatles and people went over to the East and brought back, you know, Eastern-based philosophies and things, they interpreted that the Eastern philosophies see the ego as an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a misinterpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego exists. It's not a flaw we all have.
Mm.
It's there as a ringmaster for all these personalities. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
charmer, the entertainer, the competent consultant, all these things. The ego is like the ringmaster. It's like, so when I go to a meeting, the ego decides who's going to the meeting and who's going to speak,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to negotiate, and so there's a great trend to and workshops to kill the ego.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have that philosophy. I just like the other personalities, I've befriended my ego,
Mm-hmm.
and I honor it by educating it. And as a result, you know, the ego's job, its job description, is to keep me alive in humanness.
Mm.
And it'll do whatever. And so sometimes the ego gets disrespected. It doesn't go to the gym. It doesn't get honored and, you know, given certificates and medals for great
Mm-hmm.
achievement. It gets weak, and I think that's a big part of our tragic figures around suicide
Mm-hmm.
and depression, all this kind of stuff is is just weak ego. Yeah.
Right. And so can you explain that a little bit? Like, so the idea of a weak ego, is this an extension of what you've shared there, that we almost, there's new conditioning and the demonizing of
Yes.
the ego. And so this is the stuff that then just sits further and further in the shadows, and more of a disconnect with a big part of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I mean, I don't focus on suicide, but I'm fascinated with things like the stats. Not many people know how many failed attempts there are. It's in the hundreds of thousands every year, and there is so much of a report that says, as I was falling, I knew I was doing the wrong thing, and somehow by the grace of God I survived. But just after I jumped, I knew it was wrong. And so if I'm working with someone who's sitting on the ledge, to use a metaphor, I know that the best way I can work with them, having no attachment to whether they live or die. I'm not fiddling with their destiny, but in conversation, I will endeavor to speak to a different part of them.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's only a part one wants to jump.
Yeah.
And there's a whole heap of parts, and the ego in that moment is not strong enough to shift personalities. So it's quite an unpopular thing, because everyone says things like, "Oh, bullshit! The ego's a fucking enemy."
And it's a popular, I suppose, Stoic philosophy, not the perhaps maybe broken, misconstrued kind of Stoicism that we seem to have passed on. But getting back to actual Stoicism, there's this idea of the ego as the enemy. And then something that I'm hearing in what you shared there was, when someone on the ledge, literal or metaphorical, the ego isn't strong enough. And so what I'm getting as an implication there is that it's weak, as you said, which of course, if I step back from it, can sound like an interesting, let's put it, message to deliver to someone who's on the ledge. You're not strong enough right now, which sounds like that makes most sense. But of course, there's a differentiation there, which is the ego isn't strong enough. Is that correct?
That's right. The distinction is that the destroyer personality, perhaps it's that, the destroyer personality has become stronger than the ego.
Right.
Because the ego's job is to keep me alive in humanness.
Yes.
But if my ego is not honored, respected, fortified, educated, it's eventually be overpowered by a denied or demonic personality.
And so, okay, cool. So then, this is so fascinating, and I think I was also born with that addiction of curiosity. So I want to keep diving into this. So then, when we're speaking here about the shadow, and then we've kind of now started speaking about the ego. So, okay, can you bring us back into the shadow? So the shadow is potentially a bunch of aspects of my personality, of me, and what is capable within me as a human, right? As you said, my son couldn't have done that. Sadly spoken words many times over, I think. The ego's job is to be able to understand all these sides of me, what is in the light, so called, and in the shadow, in the dark, and be able to integrate and befriend and manage them. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah.
And so then you spoke about the shadow and the conditioning. Can you expand on that for us? Because one of the things that I'm getting is we are conditioned to keep certain things in the dark.
Well, the biggest conditioning of all is to convince us that the big conditioning is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, good, bad, right, wrong, beautiful, ugly are all man-made, and I use man with specific gender.
Yes.
It is not true. If you look at something like in every legal system, there's a factor that says ignorance of the law is no defense.
Right.
So we're all expected to know the law.
Mm-hmm.
And in Australia, that kicks in when we turn 10.
Right.
Now, if you're watching the news and stuff, you know that there's stuff going on behind the scenes to try and put it up to 14.
Right.
And the pushback is saying no way, 12 max. So that's the kind of bullshit we live under.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing called Japanese Zen concept called wabi-sabi, which is worth a look, and basically says shiny metal is beautiful and rust is ugly. Who says? Man says. Basically, I'll talk about jumping out of humanness in a minute, but
Sure.
Outside of humanness, the on the edge of nothing, which is the ultimate, on the edge of nothing is a witness that everything, certainly everything we can perceive is evolving out of nothing to something and then devolving back to nothing. And there's nothing in nature that says evolving is beautiful and devolving is ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be saying that as a 71-year-old, but it's such a conditioning that for instance, a woman who works as a model until she's 35, and then 50, she's so depressed about how she looks because her conditioning of beautiful and ugly is so warped that she gets miserable and she starts trying to plasticize reality. I don't have a judgment or criticism about that. I just fascinated with the psychology.
Yeah.
So I was very very blessed, coming back to the relationship with the ego. I was very blessed when I was 14. I had a temporary teacher come in. He was 86 years old, and he perhaps the biggest influence in my life.
Right.
In 3 months, and as a result of him, I became obsessed with hypnosis and meditation. I've been meditating since I was 14. I've experienced all sorts of meditations, taught it, all that kind of stuff. So a few years ago, I thought to myself, hey, that thing that everyone talks about and I've experienced about being on the operating table, for instance, and suddenly I'm up on the ceiling looking down on the operation. So if that can happen, I must surely be able to figure out how to do it.
Right.
So it's very interesting that the first 3 times I was able to do it, I was actually driving a car.
Right.
And people say, isn't that dangerous? I say, it's not that kind of thing.
Yeah.
John down there with his years and years and years of driving experience and his joy of driving, he's got this. You know, the person doesn't go out in the operating theatre and worry about the competence of the surgeon.
Yeah.
And you know, because I'm out there, and so at first it was very fleeting, because the ego grabs hold of me and pulls me back.
Right.
Doesn't want me to go out there. You know, Buddha said something, and I'm not Buddhist, said something about the greatest ecstasy that a human can conjure is suffering in comparison to the bliss beyond humanness. So the ego knows, if I go out there and experience that, I'm not going to come back.
Right.
So it pulls me back. But with a strong and educated and honored ego, it starts to trust me.
Right.
Yeah. So the fleeting, you know, a lot of people talk about, I was meditating this morning. No, you weren't meditating. If you were meditating, you would be so spaced out. But you were practicing the techniques that have been practiced and taught to get to meditative state.
Right.
And it generally is fleeting. That thing of out there beyond what Ayurvedics call the field of pure potentiality.
And so do you think then one of the things that prevents that is maybe practice, but also the ego not wanting to let us grasp it?
Yeah. Now the big challenge is educating the ego.
So how does one develop the ego to be able to manage and welcome in all those parts of us in the shadow as well, and manage and navigate and have that kind of trust?
Well, we basically have to, first of all, see that concept that I talked about, that the big conditioning is not the reality beyond the people who are controlling, and you know, the lawmakers, the art critics, you know, all that kind of stuff. Is to know that there's a reality beyond that. And so we then have to set the work. So I might work with someone and say, you know, are you religious? Yeah, kind of. You know, brought up a Catholic, so then I would say, all right, so religion, and there's politics, and there's morals, and all these compartments, but using religion as an example. So we're going to walk along this road and climb up that mountain to be beyond humanness. Now, in your backpack, there's a container there called religion. I would like you to break it down to 3 things about that belief that you could never let go of.
Right.
And that could be a process. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 3 months. Yeah. But getting to that I've tried and tried and tried, but this thing I'm not willing to give up. So then I suggest that they take it out of the backpack and put it on the side of the path, and they can pick it up on the way back. And basically, that principle is what we have to do to get light enough to fly.
Right. And so, in that, looking at the conditioning, both perhaps big, broader, but also in my environment, community, family, etc., that have, created a weight or a series of weights under which I live and see the world and myself.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. And so, I'm piecing together all the stuff that we've spoken about now. And, when you talk about the sight, right, I'm guessing one of the things that has developed for you through all of this practice, and because obviously I know that when I ask a how-to question like that, it's almost impossible to answer because it's like live my life, and that's how. I am aware of that. But I'm seeing this ability perhaps to see the conditioning that someone has been living under, and then the beliefs that they have in their backpack. Does that sound?
Well, it's pretty sure shot to assume that they are captured by the big conditioning.
Yeah. And so then, out of interest, do you see, obviously work with me, and there's a huge, part of one of your hats and roles as a means facilitator and leader. Are there some common elements that we keep in the shadows that, we need to be able to address and welcome in and develop a relationship with and so on?
Wow, there's some big words in there. I'd love to spend all week on. One is leadership, yes. Another one is relationship.
Yes.
The science of relationship is worth exploring. And one of the models, I actually yesterday got a handwritten letter from a man expressing his gratitude and love, and I thought, wow, a handwritten letter. And I actually replied to I sent him a message today, and I spoke about this model. And models are models. Okay? And beliefs are beliefs. If what I believe was true, I wouldn't need to believe it. So that's part of the thing of belief. They're just packaging of the big conditioning.
Right.
But
so I experience some conditioning, and then that therefore comes in and creates my beliefs
and my paradigm.
Yeah.
The filters, how I interpret everything.
Yes. Right.
As a human.
Mm-hmm.
So, geez, I'm on so many tangents here.
Go for it.
So, I once walked past a TV, someone was watching, and it was one of those soaps, and I heard a young person say, "Gee, I love first dates. You can be whoever you want to be." And that is just so profound. And so, when I pass you in the street, you see my blue shell. Sorry, my green shell. My green shell is the shell that's the master of masking. And the master of which personality is driving the bus right now. So and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we survive. That's how we get closer to people, by perhaps telling them that we know someone well, but we've only met them once or something. What?
Oh.
And who I fear I am.
John, I'll just stop you there quickly because I just lost you for about 20 seconds.
Okay.
Knowing someone well is kind of where you got to. Can you kick off there again for
Yeah,
us?
that's a green shell tactic.
Yeah.
Part of the masking, part of the ribbon and the bow and all that kind of stuff. So why do I function like that? Because underneath the green shell is the blue shell. The blue shell is who I fear I am.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have core negative beliefs about ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm broken. I'm damaged. And when I meet you in the pub or get introduced on a blind date, I don't want you to see that stuff.
Mm.
I don't want you to see that deep down. I tell myself 50 times a day, you're a fuckwit. So that shell is well hidden by the master of masking.
Mm.
And then underneath that is the red core diamond of who I really am. And I think I know you broadcast a lot of stuff about partner relationships, primary relationships. So if you take that model, and I come along and our green shells meet, we're so impressed by each other.
Mm.
Because
that's the job of the green shell, right? Is to say this is my approvable version, essentially.
Like the peacock flowers.
Yeah.
Feathers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so fast forward a few chapters, and now we in relationship, we live together, all this kind of stuff. So the blue shell, having a relationship with blue shell, if we persist like beyond 2 years, then those shells get breached.
Mm-hmm.
And so blue starts meeting blue, and it's like broken glass and crushed concrete and twisted metal, and game on.
Mm.
Yeah. And the idea is to support each other to drop it, so that who I really am can relate with who you really are.
Mm.
And when people get to a blue shell meeting blue shell, they think, oh shit, I got the wrong person. I'm gonna go and get someone else.
Mm.
Starts all over again. But that primary relationship process is the biggest aspect of the curriculum to self-awareness.
Mm. And because one of the key words I think you said there in relation to the blue shell was fear. And so obviously, if you've got two people, two people relating at that level, regardless of all the details, clearly there's not the most loving and growth related environment.
Yeah, the secrets.
Mm.
Yeah, the guilt, all that kind of stuff is really challenging to work through. And what very often happens is that one shell drops before the other.
It was one partner. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so would you say that it's true in this? Sorry, John, I'm getting a big echo. Is that happening on your end?
No.
Okay. I'll just keep going and see. Here we go. What I'm getting in that is that, or would it be true in your experience that the red diamond is the thing that, regardless of which shell we're in, we actually want the other person to see that part.
Yeah.
But of course, it can't happen if I've got the shell on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's impenetrable.
But I can be red diamond at home and go to work green shell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, does this speak to the possibility, the opportunity, and the need for that ego relationship and development?
Yeah. Well, it's part of shell penetration.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how we're going for time, but I'd really like to chat about the word legend.
Yes, absolutely.
Very, very interesting for me that it belongs in a basket with master, integrity, trust. There's some words I believe are just not okay to use on oneself. Elder's another one. A lot of people in the men's work refer to me as an elder. I would never say I'm an elder.
Yes.
I would never say I'm a legend. Yeah. I would never say I'm trustworthy or I have high integrity. So just coming on to a Everyday Legends podcast, I felt the need to clarify that.
Of course. I appreciate it. But I'd love you to speak to that. As you said, I wouldn't consider myself an elder, but other people do, I suspect. I mean, I do consider you to be. So how does your relationship with that actually go?
Well, I've been in at least 10 years around men trying to figure out what it is.
Eldership.
Yeah. And what I what I think it is and how I practice it if called upon to, remember, and I don't push myself anywhere, but invited I have to go. There's an aspect of men's work that I think it is very effective and contains the magic, and it's called different things. I generally call it protocols. Some men call it guidelines, some men call it rules, but those protocols contain things like confidentiality, using I language, taking responsibility for my own feelings and all that kind of stuff. And eldering for me is about being that familiar with those protocols and practicing them that I can be with someone in a sacred space, because that protocols make that space sacred, the holding space for each other. That all I have to do is exercise the protocols. So I'll give you an example. Once in a circle of about 60 people, one of the protocols that's very, very challenging for me is not giving advice.
Right.
So a man fell to his knees because he was begging for a question. You know, there's 60 men in circle. A big moment to actually fall sobbing, pleading for an answer to a question about himself. And I encouraged him to stand up in his own power. And I said to him, I just need you to know that I am totally with you right now, and I have your best interest as my full attention, and that I don't want to speak for others because that's a protocol, but I suspect most of the men here are in the same place. So behind his back, so he couldn't actually see, I motioned with my hands for the guys to come. And I said to him, now, your question is, is it right? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, so I'm not the expert on you. You are the expert on you. What's the answer? I always know the answer because it's their answer. And so, you know, for me, eldering is just being that familiar with the protocols that I don't give advice. I don't, unless I am, you know, in a professional capacity, and the person has come for that. I can give a perspective, an opinion, an example of an experience, and use words like perhaps and you know, consider, but not you language. You know, I'm still constantly fascinated by people on the TV, politicians, Australians of the Year. You know, ask the question, what was it like on the farm when you were 6? Well, you wake up in the morning and you go for breakfast and you, and I go, you're the Australian of the Year. Hasn't anyone tapped you on the shoulder about this?
And so the extension of that being using I language. I wake up and I
exactly. Exactly. Because the disassociation of you language is a big distraction, but it's part of the big conditioning.
And thank you for that perspective. And what I'm hearing, there's a quote that I have from someone else I consider to be an elder, Francis Weller, and he talks about elders carry the stories, the healing practice, the rituals, the guardians of the collective wisdom. I'm hearing that, and you know what you've shared there a little bit, like I have the protocols and I speak to those, and the protocols are this list, what I'm hearing in this example, but it also sounds like a broader collective wisdom. It's my lived experience that allow me to be present with the person and show up how they need me to show up. You know, they might want me to give them the answer. What they need is, you know, me to hold the space and, you know, draw the information from them. It brings me to what I understand to be the root of the word educate as well, which is to draw out as opposed to put in, which sounds exactly like what you're talking about as well. And then there's this other line, I do believe it's from Francis Weller as well, where he speaks about eldership comes when the youth come for something. And so again, in that, I'm hearing that it's obviously not self-appointed, but you know, the youth, quote unquote, recognize here's someone who might have something for me, and so therefore I come. And if you're in that position, in that space where you can then provide what they've come for, that in effect is eldership. Does that kind of sound accurate for you?
Yes, that's part of it. Just going back to manifest, you'll remember right at the end when some of us were on the stage and some of us weren't. A man jumped up and said, I just had the most powerful weekend of my life. You know, what book do I read? What course should I go and do? And I don't know if you remember this, but Javon said, John, and I told a story about the hatching chicken.
Can you jog my memory and share it for the listeners, please?
Yeah. So the scenario is the teacher, as in many schools around the world, brings a box of eggs and a heat lamp, and the children are introduced to baby chickens hatching from their shells. And in this scenario, all the chickens are peeping and running around, and there's one that's been struggling and struggling and struggling. And little Johnny, because he's conditioned to be a good Samaritan, goes and opens the shell for the chicken, and I, with arrogance, I said to the audience, "And what do you think happened?" And everyone in unison said, "It died." Now, it won't always die, but the principle is that struggle is that little chicken's gym course to get the strength to get out of the shell and stand, especially as his last, or he or she is last to come out. The others have a potential to peck him to death if he's not strong enough. So, you know, that analogy, and so, you know, I said to the guy, from my perspective, telling you what book to read and what course to do is breaking your shell. Finding it is part of the work. Yeah. So in that analogy, in that context, we are going through shell after shell after shell through our lives. You know, breaking out of the shell of puberty, breaking out of the shell of virginity, breaking out of the shell of being single, all that kind of stuff. It's a constant shell breaking, and many are stuck in a shell way back, and so from my perspective, it's very important for me to know when somebody speaks to me what shell they're speaking from. Yeah. So as a professional counselor that I had a few years of, that was the hardest part. Someone walks through the door, is trying to figure out how not to patronize them, and how not to speak a language that they just don't understand. So I guess, coming back to your original question, that is a practice of being very perceptive, you know, through all those experience and studies of things like NLP, just intuitively knowing what you're doing with your eyes, you know, all the little signals. And I'm not sure if you play music, Mike, but
I don't.
But it starts off with you know, you learn scales and chords and timing, beat and rhythm. It's not music. But you know, through the practice and the dedication, the music finds me. And the music is actually not the notes, not the chords. It's hiding in between them.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It's the relationship between G and F that I put into it.
Yeah.
Given to me by the music that found me as a reward of my dedication. Yeah. So that principle applies to all aspects of life.
Yeah. So then, for you, what do you see as the role of an elder?
Stay alive.
For what purpose?
Well, for me, it's an aspect of leadership.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the science of leadership. So I made a very strong distinction a long time ago that management and leadership are two very different things. And most people are centric one way or the other, just like left and right brain predominant, or left-handed or right-handed, or you know, it's an aspect in someone's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm management centric or I'm leadership centric. So to quote Buckminster Fuller, the difference is that the leader comes aboard the ship and he says, "Wow, I just heard about these islands in this uncharted territory, and there's gorgeous naked women, and there's minerals in the ground worth a fortune, and let's go." And the manager says, "No, no, 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 no. We're not ready. We need our navigator needs to finish his diploma. We don't have enough supplies. The mattresses need replacing, and by the way, the ship is much safer in harbour." And the leader says, "Yeah, I get it, but that's not what ships are designed for." In a corporate organization, people don't realize that they've got management-centric people
Mm-hmm.
and leadership-centric people in a constant conflict of perspective.
Yeah.
And so virtually all corporates are headed by managers. They are accountant and lawyer qualified,
Mm-hmm.
and they manage leadership. So there are people in those teams who have leadership qualities who are forced to suppress it.
Mm.
So having had lots of experience, and the only reason why I'm the president of the National Men's Gathering Association is because it was headed by a manager and couldn't attract people to support him, and so drove it onto the rocks.
Right.
and my perspective was that this is not my calling,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to save it.
Mm.
And I will make it my calling for a while.
We get it to that island with all the resources and the naked woman.
Yeah. So I hope my daughter doesn't listen to this podcast. She's a massive campaigner for gender diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting that social media has shown me that, and to quote Javan, our beautiful mutual friend, saying a leader without followers is just taking a walk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so people want to lead, so they, especially on social media, they create followers.
Mm.
Now, that is not, in my opinion, naturally attracting followers. It's managing following. It's managing leadership. So,
yeah, so the idea of let me create followers isn't leading. It's actually taking away from
and so I've realized recently that there's something in the middle between management and leadership, and these people are called influencers, where they put a big effort into gathering followers, but they're actually not taking them anyway.
Mm.
So when it comes to leadership, the big question is, where are you taking me? So, be ready with an answer.
And is that something that when we then equate leadership to eldership, the question comes across as well?
I'm the youngest of 4 boys. There wasn't much opportunity to have a go at leading. But I never set out to lead.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in my book you might have seen. All I do is polish my lamp.
Yes, I
and
wanted
the
to
moths
ask about this.
And the moths come. And when they come, they bring polish. But I don't polish moths. Yeah. So I don't set out to attract followers.
Mm-hmm.
I just and I've had some doozies with some other fellows about men's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, that my primary involvement is for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking at men and saying, geez, they need something that I've got, I better go and give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
I just continue my own process, and that is polishing my lamp. And sometimes I look over my shoulder and I go, geez, where do all those guys come from? Yeah.
And moths to the lamp.
Yeah. So keying that in with the hatching chicken story, I get approached by a lot of people, men and women, who ask me if I would mentor them.
Mm-hmm.
And so my response is, as long as you mentor me as well. So there was a time a few years ago when I found myself working my full-time day job,
Mm-hmm.
with focus and discipline, and then the phone ringing, and I would have 3 calls in the night, get to 11 o'clock, 11:30, and go, geez, I wonder what happened to dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And I just realized that I had to filter what I was giving.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with a concept, and I said, yeah, sure. Step 1 is I invite you to do this exercise. Create a table for yourself and measure 4 things every day for a month, and score yourself out of 10, 10 being high. And the 4 things are, how did I sleep? How did I breathe? How was my digestion? And how was my circulation? And guess what?
What?
I got my evenings back. There's so many people who just want to talk, and talk and talk and listen and get advice and all sorts of stuff, and not put the effort in.
Beautiful.
So I remember one guy, he did it.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, that's amazing. Can you tell me about the few days when you totally forgot and you went back retrospectively and filled in the numbers? And he said, how did you know I did that? I said, I just know, because I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important is that when I ask you that question, you don't say, I never did that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So leadership is so, with the National Men's Gathering guys, I run a voluntary leadership program. We go away for weekends and stuff like that. And basically, all I do is give them an opportunity to take a time slot and do whatever they want with it. And then we all share with that person how it was for us. That's that simple. Cool.
Beautiful. I'm getting a lot of things anchor here, and really the power of seeking guidance and support, but not looking for them to bring you the answers, and doing the work. John, I've looked at the time. I'm definitely going to have to cut it there, but I want to thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your time and your wisdom and your collection of experiences. And there is a little part of me in there going, man, I can't wait to hear some of these other stories that you've alluded to and popped up. But as you said, part of the story is a privilege. So John, I feel privileged, and thank you for sharing with us today. Can you share with us finally where people can find you if they wish to check out some of your work?
I published a poetry book in August last year called The Heart of One, Poetry for Men and Those Who Love Them. The second book is done, and it's called Dream, Wake, Listen, See, and it's being launched at the Buzz Bar in Mortdale in Sydney on the 4th of September. And I'll be there playing music, singing songs, telling stories of adventure and danger, and reading some poetry. And there's a website called John Moulang Poet, and there's not a lot there because there's too much else to do. So
we'll make sure we get the links and all that information and stuff available for everyone as well.
Great.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it and incredibly grateful for it.
Thank you. And such a fabulous thing to actually spend time together.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't think I'll be back in Australia come that early date in September, but I will keep it in mind if I am.
Yeah, might be a broadcast. And with this great work that we both do, let's do it. Keep doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, John, so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.